good to go. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first Women in Finance webinar series, where we look at gender diversity in financial services. Before we start, can I get a quick gauge of who's on the call? Can you quickly type in where you're dialing in from, please, this afternoon? Glasgow, London, Birmingham, okay. UAE, okay, so we do have some international attendees today. Slovenia, Europe, that's fantastic. Okay, so it's not just the UK focused. It's really nice to see people from all over the world, actually. I'm really pleased. My name is Nadeem Chowdhury. I'm a career and executive coach, and I head up the Careers and Employability Department. And I'm also a lecturer on our undergraduate degree programs at the London Institute of Banking and Finance. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome 3 leaders from the world of banking and financial services this afternoon, who will be sharing their insights on some of the key topics that are impacting our sector, in particular, women in financial services. We have Shelley Doorey-Williams, who is the partner at the financial services firm Sionic, Emma Wheeler, who's a client services director at the global investment bank UBS, and last but not least, we have Roxana Mohammadian-Molina, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at the Blend Network, which is a peer-to-peer lending platform that was last year selected by the Mayor of London as one of the UK's top 10 fintech companies. I'll allow the guests to fully introduce themselves and their backgrounds when they speak today, and the kind of topics that we'll be covering today are around the growth of wealth amongst women, why banks, many of the banks create a female wealth strategy, some of the challenges facing the sector as a whole, and the impact fintech is making to make financial services more inclusive. Each of our guests will also be providing an overview of their thoughts on how you can navigate your career path. We have a huge mix of people on the call today, and I'd specifically like to welcome some of the young people who are on the call today, who are still in school, who are thinking about maybe entering the banking and finance industry as a career path. We really do welcome you. Okay, so I do encourage you to ask questions. We'll be collating the questions at the end, and I'll pose these to our panel members. If you're having any technical or sound issues, please check your speaker volume. It also helps if you log in on or out. And there's a technical questions document at the top of your chat room that if you have any issues, you can refer to that. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Shelley. Shelley, thank you so much for joining us today. Please, can you start by introducing yourself and providing an overview of your background and experience?
Yeah, thank you very much, Nadeem, and welcome to everybody on the call. It's fantastic to see so many people from around the globe. So I'm a governance professional. I qualified from the Chartered Governance Institute in 1998, which makes me feel incredibly old. I've worked in lots of different industries before I came into financial services. So I've worked in retail, telecoms, oil and gas, and even television. I then set up and ran my own business, and then I entered the financial services sector in 2006 when I joined UBS. And I'm currently a partner at Sionic, where I help clients using my governance background and my experience from the wealth management industry.
Tell us a bit about your interest in female wealth. Where has that stemmed from?
Well, I actually have a bit of a confession to make, which is that in my previous roles and in my earlier career, I actually resisted the topic of gender diversity. And the reason for that was, and I found this particularly when I was running my own business, as an entrepreneur and as a female entrepreneur, you were very sort of targeted by certain organisations and forums who were interested in bringing women together to talk about topics around gender diversity. And I wasn't very engaged with those type of forums. Because I had a sort of an idea that maybe there might be some sort of negativity around the topic, and I didn't want to surround myself with that sort of negativity. But I had a daughter 6 years ago, and that really changed a lot of things for me. And not only because I became a parent, which obviously changed the way that I was working, but specifically because I had a daughter, I became very interested in what the world of work would look like when she and her cohort of friends started their careers. So I started researching gender diversity, and specifically gender diversity in financial services, and that's really where I gained a particular interest in it. So that's what sort of spurred my interest, and the more research I did, the more I became interested in it. And I became much more active in the field of gender diversity, and I had the privilege of working with people like Emma at UBS on gender diversity. But I've always found that the most compelling way to try to improve levels of gender diversity is to talk about some of the business benefits to it. And one of the pieces of research that I first embarked upon that got me really interested was one that was conducted by McKinsey. And they actually said that, if we had better levels of gender diversity globally, and if there was gender parity, that globally we would be able to increase GDP by $28 trillion by 2025. And I think that's a pretty compelling business argument for why we need to increase levels of gender diversity.
So can you please tell us a bit more about how wealth amongst females is evolving? Is it sort of growing and shrinking? I mean, you've just alluded to the trillions of dollars, but can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, well, it's actually growing significantly, and it's growing now. Wealth amongst women is growing now faster than it ever has before, and this is down to a number of factors that are all coming together. So one of them is that there are more women in the workplace, so women are becoming more financially independent. There is a narrowing of pay gaps. Obviously, there are still challenges around pay gaps, but we are beginning to see narrowing of those pay gaps. So that's another factor feeding into this. More women entering higher education. And very importantly, women represent a very significant portion of the savings and retirement industry because they tend, on average, to retire earlier but to live longer. So all of these sort of compound into creating a growing wealth for women. And there's been lots of research on this, and I've sort of ingrained myself in lots of the research around this. And one of the things that I thought I could do, and we've got lots of participants on the line and dialing in who would have a view on this. So I thought we could just run a very quick poll. If we could just open up the first poll, and I'm actually going to throw this question out to the participants today. So the CFA did a piece of research in 2014 around the percentage of discretionary spend that women will control by 2028. So if I can just ask participants for their views on that, what percentage of discretionary spending will women control by 2028? I'll just give you a few seconds for you to all use your voting buttons. So I can't see all of the statistics on the screen at the moment, but I can see that people are joining in and casting their votes, which is great. Your first view is probably your best view. And I don't know if we can just expand the screen so that we can see all of the percentages there. Okay, I think a lot of people have now given their vote. So how about we end that poll? We'll just end the poll there. And hopefully we can see the answers that people have provided. I can't see the answers on the screen yet. We'll just wait for a moment. Okay, and if we can expand that a little bit. Okay, great. So I think most of you were suggesting that it was in the region of 61 to 70% will control discretionary spend. And actually, that's a very good guess. So congratulations for all those who actually voted on that one. So the actual percentage that will be controlled by 2028 is 75%. So 75% of discretionary spending will be controlled by women by 2028. And again, I think that's a really compelling business statistics for us to think about. And the other element to this growth and influence that women have over wealth is actually around the fact that a lot of women are set to be the benefactors of a $30 trillion rollover of wealth over the next 25 years in the US alone. And this is because these women will be the inheritors of baby boomer wealth that have been inherited by a couple. But again, just statistically, that the women will outlive their male spouses. So they're set to be the biggest benefactor of that wealth, that intergenerational wealth transfer. So that's another key factor as well.
Okay, so what are some of the trends in female wealth management that you've been seeing?
Yeah. So there are some sort of emerging service offerings. There are organisations that some of you here today may have heard of, so such as Ellevest, who are setting up specifically to target this sort of female wealth growth and the specific needs as well. And one of the colleagues who I used to work with at UBS used to speak a lot about the amount of talent that we need in the industry, and that's why it's so encouraging to see so many young people dialing in to discussions such as these. She used to talk about the fact that there's this real sort of competition building in the industry particularly for female talent, so that we can all group together and provide more. She used to refer to this gender intelligent way. So we mustn't assume that women necessarily want to have female advisors. It isn't about that, but to have a gender intelligent way around providing services to women, which is why events such as today are so important for us to try and encourage more women to come into the industry to create that gender intelligence level of service. So I think the other interesting thing is we still have an issue when it comes to women within the industry, and there's lots of research about women at senior levels. But the other area is actually about the number of female advisors in the industry that we have. And we've got a very global participant range of people dialing in today. But in the UK, the FCA conducted their own piece of research about the number of female advisors. And so again, I'm just going to open up a poll because I'd love to get views from people. So the question here is around approved persons, so people who are approved to give financial advice in the UK. So if we could just open up the second poll, please, that would be great. So the question I'm posing to everyone is, what percentage of approved persons, according to the FCA, are women? So how many advisors do we think who are approved in the UK are women? What percentage? So we've got quite a lot of responders saying it's between 21 and 30%. That seems to be the favourite at the moment. Okay, so maybe we could close the poll. I think most people have had a chance to vote now. So what we can see from that is most people, the majority of people who voted on that, were thinking that it was somewhere between 21 and 30%. Well, I think this is another quite shocking statistic. The number of female approved persons in the UK is actually 17%. So we can see that there's this emerging wealth and a fast growth of wealth creation amongst women. But on the other side, we have a rather low number of female advisors in the industry right now. So I think, you know, it's fair to say that we've got this bridge that we really need to try and build. And some people may say, well, are the needs of female clients any different from men? And of course, we should not lose sight of the fact that everyone's needs are unique. These are generalizations, but this is where the research is around female clients and their needs. So I'm actually going to throw out my final question, which is around, you know, what percentage of clients are saying their advisors do not understand their needs? So if we can open up this next poll. So this was research actually conducted by UBS, and they actually canvassed views from 1,700 female clients of wealthy individuals across the industry, asking them what percentage of those clients said that their advisors didn't understand their goals and didn't actually have an empathy with their lifestyle. So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that question. Okay, so maybe we can close the poll now. I think a lot of people have voted. So what did you all think? Let's have a look. If we can just expand the screen a little bit so we can see all of the percentages, that would be helpful. Thank you. So the majority of people on the poll were saying it was between 61 and 70%. And that's fairly accurate, actually. But again, it's rather depressing, isn't it? But in actual fact, the percentage of women that said that their advisors don't understand their goals and nor do they understand their lifestyle is 73%. So there's this huge business opportunity there to actually service the needs of female wealthy clients much, much better.
So based upon that, what do you think is driving some of these poor ratings, and what are the actual needs of female clients, say, as opposed to say something else?
So I think one of the big areas, and this was researched by Ernst & Young, is that there is a tendency for female clients to be more interested in achievement of their personal financial goals as opposed to the sort of underlying investment management. And actually, if you look at a lot of marketing, communications and literature in financial services, quite a lot of it is actually skewed towards investment content, investment returns, whereas female clients tend to have more of a preference around achievement of their personal goals. So that's maybe sort of, one area. I think another area that's quite interesting is that there have been surveys conducted around the level of engagement that women have when it comes to finances. And one of the surveys, again conducted by UBS, was suggesting that women are far more engaged when it comes to sort of day-to-day sort of household managing of those finances. But when it comes to longer-term financial decision-making, they do have a tendency to defer sometimes to their male spouse. And that can have an obvious but unfortunate consequence, because if you have a situation where there's a divorce or a female becomes widowed, there can very often be financial surprises. So maybe the wills weren't properly put together, and perhaps there were high levels of debt that emerged after an event, etc. So I think that that's a really sort of key area to try and help women become more engaged in those longer term financial decision makings.
And my final question before we hand over to Emma is, what are your thoughts on the future for gender diversity in banking and finance?
There's an awful lot of research about levels of female representation at senior levels within the industry, and I think the one that for me is the most stark, and it definitely proves that there is a long way for us to go, is that if you look at current trends of how gender diversity is advancing in the sector, there is a piece of research that suggests that we won't reach 50% female representation at executive committee level, so complete parity at executive committee level, until 2107. So that's based on current trends. So clearly we've got a long way to go. There have been positive changes. I don't want to paint a picture of doom and gloom, and there's a lot of positive changes happening, but it would be great if we could really accelerate those changes.
Shelley, I think those stats are quite startling, to be honest. I'd like to now welcome Emma Wheeler into the conversation. Emma, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Nadeem, and thank you very much for including me in your discussion today. I've actually got 2 children at university, and I think that these opportunities to hear from people in industry and the path they've taken are so valuable. So I'm responsible for female client strategy at UBS, part of a global commitment to better serve our female clients, to raise awareness of the increasing ownership of private wealth by women, as Shelley's just talked about, and the need to drive industry change, and also to share financial education for women to encourage them to invest and to own their wealth. And this is an approach conceived back in 2014 when a very innovative group of senior women at UBS, I can describe them as that because it was before I joined, responded to a piece of global research, the research actually that Shelley mentioned, published by the Centre for Talent Innovation, which talks about how women feel their financial advisors treat them, or don't understand them. But I've gone into a little detail about my background, because often people say, how on earth did you get into that role? So I just want to explain. So my background's in strategic communications. I left London University with a degree in English and Classics, determined to be an editor in a publishing house. That was quite a long time ago now, but I was fortunate enough to get a job at Penguin, realised I couldn't survive in London on an editorial assistant's wage, and wasn't prepared to ask my family for financial support. So I joined a consultancy called Burson Marsteller. It's a global communications consultancy. And I'd already been working for 2 years, and they said, well, you can, we'd love to have you on board, but you can join us as a secretary only, because otherwise you'd have to join our graduate training scheme, and that would take you back 2 years. So anyway, I decided to join as a secretary. They said you won't progress further than a secretarial role, but I thought I'll prove them wrong. So I then was very quickly promoted, and was the fastest promoted account director in the London office. And I say that because I really found something I loved doing, combining writing with advising companies and watching them grow as a result of what I was doing. So this really appealed to my entrepreneurial spirit, and I really believe that if you're passionate about what you do, it doesn't feel like work. So actually finding something that you enjoy doing and pursuing that really does make a difference in life. So I moved on to work in-house in various companies. So Avis Europe, the car rental brand, a FTSE listed company where I gained investor relations experience, and then to Coutts, another wealth manager, where my interest in the intersection of private good or private benefit and public good began. So how the wealthy use their money to do good and have impact on the world. I then worked for a series of law firms, either as a consultant or in-house, becoming an industry expert in advising senior partners in these firms on communication strategies, particularly around merging businesses. So yeah, the communications challenge that exists when two companies merge and the impact on their employees. And the legal sector has faced much consolidation in recent years. So that was very important for them. And I was then invited by one of these firms to be their head of content and thought leadership, working with the partners to create research to share with their clients, turning it into something that you can actually have a conversation with the client about. So how you take intellectual capital and you turn it into something to talk to a client about. So that's often a big challenge for complex know-how type businesses. So how you do that. And it was then 2 years ago that I was approached by UBS and the female client strategy role I'm now in, because I could see that I could combine this entrepreneurial passion with a social purpose, which is so important to me. Yeah, so this is where I've been for 2 years, really enjoying every minute and feeling extremely fortunate.
For that overview. Can you tell us a bit about why many of the banks, such as UBS, have designed a specific female wealth strategy? Why is this important?
As Shelley was just saying, it's actually simple. The whole face of wealth is changing. Women are increasingly owning wealth in the world. They're earning it, inheriting it, controlling it. The statistics currently 32%. It's growing by 7.1% every year, and likely to accelerate dramatically in the next 4 to 5 years. That's despite the pandemic. So the growth of owned wealth by women will outstrip total global wealth in that period. So that's why banks are doing it, I believe, to better serve their female clients. But I think one thing that we're doing differently at UBS specifically is really training our client advisors to have those conversations. And Shelley touched upon this because, you know, we know that women think differently about money and want to invest it in a different way. So making sure that our client advisors really draw that out and have, you know, the best conversation for that client, a female client, is so important. And then I think, you know, for us, it's about financial education as well, and you know, really supporting women in getting started with investing, understanding the impact that their wealth can have on the world is so important. And yeah, I think that's a big part of what UBS stands for now. And you know, we do know that 88% of women choose to invest in values-based or cause-based funds. So you know, you can achieve good and still achieve good commercial returns.
Emma, can you speak what financial services is doing to make finance more inclusive for women? Are there any key initiatives and success stories that come to mind from your own experience?
I can specifically talk about two things that I'm involved with, and one is the Rose Review board. So last year, the government asked a lady called Alison Rose, who was then the deputy CEO of Barclays and now is the first female CEO of any British bank, RBS, to conduct a research into female entrepreneurship in the UK. And she published, she worked with McKinsey, published a report called the Rose Review, and from that, the government has initiated a series of boards. One is an industry advisory board that I sit on, which is actually very focused on how we unleash this £250 billion untapped opportunity that is female entrepreneurship in the UK. And the Rose Review is a specific specifically for the UK, but the report actually looks at other countries and what's happening in other countries, so it's well worth a read. And these initiatives too are happening globally. So and you know, it's so important because you know, one of the areas I'm focusing on is how women are not getting access to funding for their projects. So yeah, this startup funding is actually the #1 barrier mentioned by women who want to get started. Only 1% of all venture capital goes to businesses founded by all female teams. So that is something that we are really driving. So not a success story yet, but it will be. And the other big piece I'm working on is around gender smart investing. So how do we actually invest in funds and companies that are led by women? So again, supporting the opportunity that is female entrepreneurship. And it's not about, this is not about gender diversity. There's an economic imperative here too, as well as an ethical one.
Thank you so much, Emma. I'd now like to welcome Roxana to the conversation. Roxana, thank you so much for waiting patiently. Roxana, please introduce yourself and provide an overview of your background and experience.
Thank you so much, Nadim, and thank you, Shelley and Emma, for sharing your experiences. So I am Chief Strategy Officer and Board Member at a fintech company, Blend Network. Blend Network is a peer-to-peer property lending market. So essentially what we do, very simply explained, we connect investors with borrowers in the property market, because over the past 10 years after the global financial crisis, many banks, they stopped lending to SMEs, and particularly they stopped lending to SME property developers. So we focus on lending to developers who are building more affordable houses across the UK regions, and who essentially cannot borrow from the bank because they are too small for the banks. They are SME developers. And I will go into more details, but many of our borrowers are actually female property developers who I didn't even actually know that there are so many of them, but it's good to see. So that is what we do at the network. Before that, I spent 8 years in the city. I was a commodities analyst and strategist at Barclays and Morgan Stanley. Which obviously at the time it was a very, very male-dominated industry. I think it still is, but a lot less. I was on the trading floor and often the only women, around. So that is my background, essentially coming from the investment banking and now working into the fintech, which is a lot more dynamic, diverse, I would say, compared to traditional banking.
We've heard from Shelley and Emma on some of the key strategies taking place around female wealth. Please, can you provide an overview of the sector as a whole, and what are some of the key challenges facing your clients?
Yes, so I going back to essentially the way that this particular sector of fintech, the peer-to-peer lending, emerged. So it was really the issue was that the banks were not lending. So peer-to-peer emerged as a solution to provide funding to SME property developers. So still getting finance is a big challenge for the smaller companies, for the smaller developers, and I think that is really where we fit into the market. So I mentioned, and I will give you an example. For example, we have borrowers of us who are female property developers. We have a lady that we work with very often. She actually used to work in a bank in HSBC and left the banking career to be a property developer. And they struggle to get finance for their projects. They are very sound projects. For example, she's developing affordable houses across the Midlands that are for professionals to live in. But they have very difficulty to accessing finance. So what we do is that we fund those property developers, and because we are a peer-to-peer system, our investors they register in the platform, and they can lend any amount they want. So in that sense, what we are providing is the democratization of investing. So one thing that for us is very, very important and has been since the beginning is that we want to have an equal proportion of female and male investors in our platform. And in fact, we have slightly higher female investors, which I think is very unusual for for any type of investment company. We do a lot of educational events around alternative finance and what peer-to-peer and what it is, to simply educate investors and inform them about what is alternative finance. And also, I think the fact that many of our projects are led by female, so you are essentially investing in a project that is a female property developer. We get a lot more female investing in those projects. And I think the interesting thing also about the peer-to-peer model and the alternative finance is that anyone can invest in these projects from a relatively small amount of money. So in the past, if you wanted to invest in property or still, you obviously need to put a lot of money down to buy the property, then you need to manage the property, then it's the headache and tenants and so on. So this model, what it allows is that for everyone, the minimum investment is just £1,000. So anyone to come into the platform and pick and choose and say, okay, I want to put £1,000 here, £1,000 there, and essentially achieve similar returns to what they would get, buying a property, 8 to 12% return. So it's opening up that investment space to a lot more, to a wider range of investors. So yes, we talked a little bit about the challenge, which remains access to funding for a lot of our clients.
Roxana, how important is fintech to the financial services sector? Are there any insights that you can share with us that show the impact that technology is having on the clients that you're working with?
Yes, so I think initially when fintech and the alternative finance sector emerged a decade ago, it was still called, and still is alternative finance, but it's really starting to become a part of the ecosystem, increasing part of the ecosystem, and we are working very closely with traditional banks. For example, there is at the moment the bank referral scheme introduced by the HMRC. That means that we actually work with banks like Barclays, like the traditional lenders. So I think it's very interesting to see how it is becoming integrated into the ecosystem. and simply offering an additional layer of, easy to use, that technological advances to make the customer journey a lot more efficient, a lot better, and also to be able to help traditional banks, helping their customers. So when a bank like Barclays is happy, Barclays is happy, and we are happy, is a win-win situation.
Shelley, what are some of your key tips for career success? What do you think young women should know about when thinking of studying and working in the financial services sector?
Yeah, I suppose much of what I wanted to share is sort of sector agnostic, because I've worked in lots of different areas. But I just wanted to echo one of the things that Emma said when she did her introduction. Try whenever you can to pick something you actually feel passionately about, because then work doesn't feel like work. It feels like you're making a difference on something that you feel very passionate about. And I know that sometimes might be a bit of a challenge, but I think if you can do that, that's very worthwhile. I always think it's good to be very flexible in your approach. So just experiment, because it's very hard at the beginning of your career to be able to pick something very specific, because you don't really know until you're in it. So, again, Emma spoke about her earlier career and how she started out. I started out as a junior secretary at 18 years old. I didn't go to university. I studied as I sort of worked my way through my career. So I think being flexible and sort of experimenting is very important. I think it's always good to get your hands dirty. I think to know the work is to do the work. Don't be afraid of getting involved in tasks or roles that you feel may be a bit menial. Because you can learn from every single experience you have. So take that time to reflect and learn, regardless of how menial the task. I'm sure that there is something that you can learn from each area. In my career, I've always thought about the business first and me second. So I never had a career plan. I got myself into a work environment, started learning, picked areas that I maybe had strengths in, and I always thought about where could I see a business need, or as Emma said, where is there an area that you feel very passionate about, and let that be your guide rather than you thinking about you as an individual and your career. My view is, if the business is a success, then my success will be a secondary success, not the other way around. I think that's very important to remember. I think more so now that I've got a child and I'm a working parent, I really always think about working for maximum impact. So thinking about, how am I actually creating impact rather than just doing the work? And I think that's a very useful way of prioritizing your time and your energy. And I think energy is equally as important as time, by the way. I am a huge advocate of lifelong learning. I am generally always learning from a sort of an on-the-job experience, or I'm actually studying. So I studied something last year and I took an exam, and that's not unusual for me. I qualified as a governance professional by studying weekends, and I got my MBA from Cass Business School by studying at weekends. So I'm a really big advocate of lifelong learning, and LIBF obviously has a wide range of courses that you can take in a sort of virtual or classroom based. And then my final thought, which is sort of financial services specific, which is, as I think, all of us have depicted today, there's some huge opportunities in financial services. I think it has been a very traditional, people say male dominated industry. However, there is a lot of opportunity right now. I mean, we've heard from Roxana and her business model. There's innovation happening right now. So I think it's a really exciting industry to come into. And it's an industry that I feel collectively wants to change. We can see where we need to be, but actually encouraging new people to come into the industry and encouraging people from diverse backgrounds, I think, will really provide that sort of fresh perspective for us to sort of move into the next era for financial services. So I think there's a big opportunity for people who are interested to come into this industry and actually bring that fresh perspective.
Emma, what are some of your career success stories? What do you think young people should know about when thinking of studying and working in the financial services sector?
Yes. So yeah, I'm often asked, this this question. I believe that opportunities present themselves to you, and sometimes there's a bit of luck involved, but gradually you work out what you love doing, and this is so important, as I've mentioned before. If someone offers you an opportunity, then explore it fully. I always do the SWOT analysis, and work it out, and then have courage to try something new. Shelley touched on this. Constantly learning from people around you is fundamental. If you're not learning from the people around you, then don't stay. That's always been my mantra through my career. The other thing is mentors. I've been very lucky to have some amazing mentors. Look out for these. As they can make a big difference in your career. Some other advice too. Yeah, never burn your bridges. I was just trying to think of all the great advice I've been given. You never know who you might need or meet around the next corner in life and in your career. So never burn your bridges. And then I just really wanted to say, for the young women listening today, I urge you to have financial independence. And take control of your financial decisions at every stage of your life. Talk about money in your relationships and families, and learn how to manage your money. There's some great research on many sites, but as I speak for UBS, the ubs.com/women pages, check out our module on financial confidence if you want to know how to get started. And also, there are many great apps out there to help you these days, and particularly look for the ones that focus on sustainable impact investing, because you can use your money wisely and make money and do good at the same time. So yeah, I think that's probably, I haven't been in financial services all my career, but I think for me, really, it's about, making an impact, having a social purpose, very powerful in everything that you do, and even more important these days, years ago.
And Roxana, what is it about the sector that still excites you and interests you? Why should some of our younger attendees consider working in this sector? Do you have any career tips for some of the female candidates?
Yes, I think many of my points were already really discussed. Thanks, Shelley and Emma, for sharing those. For me, one of my mantras actually is, and has been through my career, is you don't ask, you don't get. And I really encourage everyone to do it, because at work or in life, for me it's very simple. No one will come knocking at your door and saying, do you want a promotion? Do you want more money? Do you want more flexible working? Nothing. If that is what you want, you really have to ask for it. So I think that has been very important for me. And I think one of the questions actually I saw someone asking about the male-dominated environment and how to work in that environment. I think it is becoming, the financial sector is definitely becoming less so than it used to be. And I think a lot is about trying for the financial industry itself, try to break that image of being a highly male-dominated place. So to break the barriers and to break that image by bringing in more role models. I think the role models is very important, because when you see when you see a place that is full of men, obviously is less appealing. But when you hear at the higher level female managing directors or female who have been very successful in that environment, and it helps to clear the image, to clear that type of image. I think confidence is very important as well. So, obviously that depends a lot on personality. But for example, for me, I think I was less so at the beginning, but this is also something that you build as you work in the environment. So really building on the confidence. And I think women tend to question themselves a lot more. Am I able to do that job? What if I'm not good enough? What if I cannot do it? While men really tend to go for it. So I think building that confidence has been very important for me. So just not think too much about it. If you have been offered this, then there's a good reason for that. And so I think believing in yourself and having confidence is important. Somehow related to the career, but I think it's important to invest and financially invest. So for example, for me, throughout all my career, I had my investment portfolio. I was investing in properties and so on. And I think that is important in the sense that you have the financial freedom. If tomorrow I'm in a place that I'm not happy, I'm miserable, I have the financial freedom to walk away and find another opportunity that I want. So investing is very important, and I touched upon this before, but really I think we need to focus a lot more on why women are not investing so much and start investing. So somehow related to the career is the importance of having your portfolio of investment and your second, third source of income has been very important for me. Networking is another one. For me, some of the greatest opportunities I have had in my career has simply been by networking. And I think the event that we are having today, thank you guys for organizing, is an incredible, example of networking. So nowadays it's a lot easier because everything is virtual. So go out, reach out to people and ask for help. So, I think people actually are very, very open when you ask them for something. Maybe I need an introduction, and someone there is able to introduce me to someone, and for them it's just a simple email. So asking for help, networking is very important.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for fascinating discussions and insight.